I'll throw that over. I need that, maybe. Representative, welcome to Off the Record. It is good to see you. So let's cut to the chase as you try to ban cell phones in the classroom. How is the feedback running from parents, pro, con?
Well, for starters, it's not a ban. We're talking about restricting or prohibiting use in specific times and places within schools. And this is something that a number of school districts across the state are already looking at, have implemented some kind of pilot program. But to your question, the number one pushback that we get from parents is that in the event of an emergency, I want to be able to contact my child at school.
To which
perfectly understandable.
To which you say,
well, when you take a step or two back, as I said, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, the anguish and the anxiety, if there is an actual emergency at your child's school and you can't get a hold of them, and we're all used to having that instant contact, right, with cell phones today. I get that. But the question is, how does your child communicating with you, who might be miles away from the emergency site, how does that improve your child's or enhance your child's safety? You want your child focused on the trained adult that's at the head of the classroom.
But here's your problem with that argument. You're appealing to their brain. This is not their brain problem. No. It's a heart problem.
And very difficult to legislate for the heart.
Representative, were you surprised by the governor's support for this proposal? You introduced it last year, and I don't think it received a committee hearing.
Surprise isn't it. Obviously, it has some political positive traction to it. It's become a national issue. It's an international issue. Many countries in the EU have addressed this issue. Very pleased that she's on board, that it's made its way to her desk, that she sees value in it, and has made the decision to make it a priority. She has some influence in Lansing, so I like that very much.
Representative, do you see this more as a pedagogical issue, or is this something that's about, as the governor has touched upon, mental health for young people, given their fixation on technology?
You were just looking to get pedagogical in there, or is that the
drinking game for those folks at home? And that was
this part's edited out. Yeah.
That was the bingo card.
No, it's not so much a way of how information is taught or transferred, and if an instructor wants to use that device in the classroom instruction time, that's the teacher's discretion. Just like there's no TV watching. Well, sometimes you roll a TV in and you watch some things that are important, but what we're trying to do is eliminate that distraction. And the schools that have put this in, one of the things you hear from teachers is how tremendous it is to be standing at the front of the classroom and see 25 or 30 sets of eyeballs staring back at you instead of this stuff under the desk.
Isn't this something that just simply a teacher in a classroom could just say, we're not using our phones right now, put them in this locker?
Yes.
I mean, so I guess I'm curious, as Republicans, we sort of usually think of like small government, right? Yeah. Talk to me about your thoughts about having government have the role of being an arbiter of what should be happening within a classroom.
Well, K through 12 education, we have 20 billion reasons for having an interest in what goes on in the classroom. And if this is seen as an impediment to getting value out of that $20 billion investment, I think it's certainly within our scope to take a look at it. When you look at local districts, intermediate school districts, charter sponsors, there are about 830 or more school districts in the state of Michigan. If you're going to wait for each one of those to reach a decision on making a move forward on this particular issue, which is, everyone will tell you is a distraction in the schoolroom, along with the bullying and the taunting aspect in the hallways and in the public areas of the or open areas of the school buildings. If we were to wait for all 830 of them to come up with a decision, or each school or each teacher to implement something, we'd be waiting an awful long time.
Representative, what's your timetable?
I'd like to see it take effect at the beginning of the next class, next school session.
Okay, well, then that's a fast agenda.
Yeah.
When are you going to have the first hearing on this?
Well, the primary co-sponsor that I sought out was Representative DeBoer, who's the chair of the Education Policy Committee, and she's on board, and I'm hoping we'll get a hearing very soon.
So, in other words, you don't have a commitment for a hearing.
Do not. I just reissued the bill last week.
Yeah, but you
Well,
worked on
earlier
it. You
this
worked
week,
on it
rather.
last year, didn't you? Lay the groundwork. You should have come in with both legs running on this thing.
You would have thought, but it was an election year. There were a lot of distractions. I do have support on both sides of the aisle. I've been working closely with some friends on the other side of the aisle. People see the value in this. It's just a question of getting it started. I'm sure that we'll get a hearing in education, and we'll take it from there.
Do the soups say to you, get this done?
No, not necessarily get it done. I have the privilege of participating in a monthly legislative breakfast with the Oakland County Intermediate School District, and I get the eastern half of the superintendents. Some schools are already doing this, and it gets them out of a kind of, there's something called a collective action trap. Well, nobody else is doing it, or everybody else is doing it. This can create a statewide standard. They get it. They would like support from the state to move it forward. It takes the onus off of them. It takes the pushback from parents off of them. And I'm more than happy to be that boogeyman. You know, the 14-year-olds can be mad at me, and that's just fine.
Put your finance chair hat on for a second.
Yes.
When the governor wants the corporation folks to kick in more money through a tax increase, does that have any chance in your committee?
Well, it's a roads package.
Why the long breath?
I'm being thoughtful. It's a roads package, and so there will likely be very many moving parts to this. I thought it was interesting in the State of the Address, the governor started off talking about the ill effects of a tariff on consumers, and then ended up talking about corporate or business tax increases, which will have the same ill effect on consumers. One set of money goes to Washington, the other set goes to Lansing, and maybe is more preferable.
So is it DOA in your committee?
No.
Are you of the belief that new revenue is needed? I know Speaker Hall has advanced a plan that he thinks he can reshuffle the deck with existing revenue and find money there. But Democrats are pretty assertive that there needs to be new revenue going forward. I guess, where do you stand there?
Well, Speaker Hall has said a number of times that we have enough revenue coming into the state right now, and he's more than willing to show the governor how to use it to achieve this particular objective. You know, there was a $9 billion surplus. There was $3.5 billion in bonding. There was a $1.5 billion or so in infrastructure support. There were another billion over anticipated. You add that all up, that's $15 billion. Just right there. If you, the first state budget that she signed, excluding federal dollars, was about $34 billion. The last one she signed was 46. So it's about a 50% increase. There's money here. It's a question of priorities and what you're willing to give and take in order to provide road funding.
Representative, this week, a colleague of yours, Representative Josh Shriver, made an announcement. He was by himself. No other Republicans wanted to stand with him, basically saying that the Supreme Court should make gay marriage illegal in the land again. What do you make of Josh Shriver doing this, and what does it mean for your Republican caucus?
It's a huge distraction. And it was, personally, I think it was drawing attention to his preference and not the caucus preference, which is unfortunate. We have a lot of good things that we can be doing here in the state, and that's not one of them. I happen to have 2 sisters-in-law that became 4 sisters-in-law. This has been a settled issue in our family for a long time. They're a part of our family, and we love them.
Representative, can I take you back to your answer to my question, which was, is it dead in committee? And you said no, which means it is alive in your committee. So you're open to doing this?
I'm open to looking at what comes out of the negotiations from the governor and the speaker, certainly.
But if the speaker continues to say there will be no tax increase, you are not going to go against the speaker, are you, sir?
Probably not if I want to remain chair of the House Finance.
Well, I appreciate your honest answer there.
That's reality.
Let's put it this way. It's not dead in your committee, but it's clearly on life support.
Michigan's corporate income tax, when you take a look at the top 10 population inflow states, all those kind of southern warm states, Texas, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Idaho and Utah are in there. Our corporate income tax is 46% higher than the average
But she could
of
raise
theirs.
the money by not going to the corporate income tax. She could find other ways to raise money on business. You would be open to that. Let's say keep the corporate income tax off the table. Other tax increases for business could be on the table.
My preference would be a consumption tax because taxpayers can mitigate that. They can economize and they can control that. Income tax, no one wants to economize on their income. No one wants to mitigate their tax burden by economizing on their income. So those would be the kinds of things I'd be looking
sales
for.
tax increase then?
It could be other user fees that you would incur as you use those services.
Do you want to hang around for overtime?
Sure.
All right, let's. Okay, well, let's go to co-credit. You're a gamer, aren't you?
My day is open.
It's going to be a long overtime.
Magically, so is mine. After these closed credits, and we'll see you for more Off the Record. Go to WKAR.org for the good representative.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.